Did the Jewish rebels have a coherent military strategy? Did they win any battles? Leadership, unified leadership?
Yeah, they after the outbreak of the fighting. So after the demonstrations against the Roman procurator and then the massacres of civilians, the Roman governor of Syria, a guy named Cestius Gallus, in the summer of 66 brought a large army of around somewhere between 30 and 35,000 Roman soldiers and also auxiliaries and soldiers supplied by local kings down into Judea to kind of snuff out or suppress what was going on there. He was actually ambushed on his way into Jerusalem and then on his way out, and the Romans lost more than a Roman's legion worth of infantrymen and hundreds of cavalrymen as well. So if you believe that the war started with the rioting, then what happened with Cestius is kind of, in my view, the first real battle of the war, and the rebels won that, won those two battles sort of hands down. Afterward, when the Romans appointed a general called Vespasian to lead their response to that, in 67, when the Roman army came down from Antioch, a much larger army, the big battles that were fought in the Galilee at Jotapata and also Gamla, the Romans won, and then subsequently they of course besieged Jerusalem in 70 and then Masada in 73 or 74, all of which they successfully emerged as victors of. So in my book, what I try to do is I try to assess why that was the case. And we know that after the initial successes in 66, that the leadership of the rebellion in Jerusalem did establish an organization for the defense of both Judea and the Galilee. They appointed generals, including Josephus, who was given the job of organizing the defense of the Galilee and also Gamla, and various other leaders in other places as well. We're not really sure what the strategies of the other leaders were. In Josephus's case, we know a lot about his strategy because he tells us, not only in his work on the war, but the so-called Jewish Antiquities and some other works as well. He talks about how he organized the defense, and basically, to boil it down to its essence, his idea was to fortify the towns and the villages in the Galilee and at Gamla and elsewhere as well. The problem with that, of course, was that in essence, it kind of drew the Roman armies to these places. And of course, the Romans had a huge amount of experience with sieges. So I argue in my book that that was a kind of critical mistake on Josephus's part, if not the leadership in Jerusalem itself.
What should they have done in the alternative? And did they have military experience? I mean, my sense is that Josephus maybe had some administrative experience, but not really military experience.
Yeah, it's a great question, and actually, it's a question that, you know, if you read a lot of books about the Jewish revolt, the big revolt, it's not one that, for some reason, a lot of scholars or historians have sort of faced up to and considered the implications of. The short answer is that both on the leadership level and also the level of the rank and file of soldiers, they had very little experience, almost no experience. I mean, there were the young men of Judea and the Galilee, the vast majority of them were farmers or traders or involved in other kinds of occupations. There wasn't regular military service for most Jews. That auxiliary force that I was talking about before, which was kind of a holdover from the Herodian era, were mostly recruited from the non-Jewish population of the region. So they were the descendants of Greeks who had come there in the wake of Alexander the Great, or people whom Josephus calls Syrians, who are arguably sort of Hellenized Syrian or other indigenous peoples who served in these local auxiliary armies. So what we're looking at is a revolt led by people, by and large, with virtually no military or command experience, and commanding soldiers who, very few of whom had military experience as well. And when you look at the rebellion in that light, I think it's actually amazing that they did as well as they did against the Romans. And it's, hindsight is 2020. And I think it's, we have to be kind of careful and respectful because we're talking about human beings here and, warfare, which always involves, death and destruction. So I want to be careful about what I have to say here. So I don't know that a different strategy would have succeeded, but there were certainly precedents in the history of the people which were alternatives. For instance, of course, what happened under the Maccabees, especially during the early period of the Maccabean revolt, the strategy was completely different. Of course, they were fighting against a different army, the Seleucids, but their strategy was sort of, a guerrilla warfare, a hit and run warfare, a war of attrition. And would it have been possible for the rebels in 66 to not have pursued the wars from behind walls, to have gone out into the countryside and eventually forced the Romans to come to some sort of negotiated settlement? I think that has to be considered as a possibility anyway.